Greetings to Ms. Powell for this being your first session at the Council since you've been appointed by Mr. Bayonet and your fellow commissioners. So thank you for being here and representing. Ms. Powell, we look forward to working with you and your entire team to keep our entire water system safe and flowing. With that, I don't know if you have any opening comments, or we can turn it over to Mr. Lovchenko to walk us through the packet.
Well, why don't we hear from the folks at the table first, and then I've got some slides that will help walk us through the packet efficiently.
Fantastic. Ms. Powell, if you want to introduce yourself, and then we can just go through the team.
I just press here.
There you go. You're on.
All right. Thank you, President Glass. And on the subject of keeping the water flowing, I'm going to touch a little bit on how we do that. I think the CIP is really our biggest lever for reliability and resilience, as we talked about. So good afternoon to you. I'm not sure if I should address you as Chair or President, but Chair President Glass, and Council Members Balcom and Council Member Stewart. I'm General Manager and CEO of WSSC Water, Keisha Powell. It is our pleasure to brief you on WSSC Water's fiscal year 24 through fiscal year 29 Capital Improvements Program. I want to take a moment to recognize Commissioners Bayonet, Commissioner Foster, and Commissioner Dennis. I would also like to recognize and thank our Senior Legislative Analyst, Keith Lashenko, for his thorough budget presentation, his budgetary knowledge, experience, and collaboration, which are much appreciated. And I also want to recognize the members of our senior team at WSSC Water that are here with us this afternoon, and those not in attendance that work diligently to prepare the budget and prioritize our priorities, as well as our dedicated and talented WSSC Water workforce, 1,680 strong. I'm honored and humbled to have been selected by our commissioners as WSSC Water's General Manager and CEO, and having the opportunity to forge strong relationships with you in service to your constituents and our 1.9 million customers. While new to WSSC Water, I was born and raised in Baltimore, and in fact started my public utility management career with the Bureau of Water and Wastewater in the city of Baltimore. So it is good to be back home doing this work on behalf of the largest water utility in Maryland and among the largest in the country, with an impressive track record of no drinking water quality violations in nearly 105 years. Our work protects public health, the environment, and provides for essential services like fire protection, so our customers, your constituents, can focus on their families and our communities. I want to give you a little intro into how I joined the Commission in January. One of the first things I did was establish a transition team, much like you would see for any company facing a transition in leadership. The transition team includes a broad cross-section of employees from nearly every department and every one of our locations to aid in developing a body of short and long-term strategic recommendations for improvements. This team is entering the last of 3 30-day sprints to develop a detailed transition report, which I will deliver to all commissioners, employees, and key stakeholders like you at the end of March. As part of our transition, working with our commissioners, I established 5 key priorities for this next year, which I believe will carry us forward. Those priorities include building a strong workforce, service delivery, financial stewardship, regulatory challenges, and operational reliability and resilience. And underpinning those priorities is the integration of diversity, equity, inclusion, and environmental justice in all aspects of our work and in the outcomes we aim to achieve, including those through implementation of our CIP. As today's briefing focuses on WSSC Water's capital improvement plan, it's important to note the tie that our 5 priorities have to the implementation of the CIP, as well as safeguarding the investments we are making on our customers' behalf. WSSC Water's workforce is working to maintain $9 billion in assets. So building and maintaining a strong workforce is vital to protecting our infrastructure assets. Where service delivery is concerned, the top priority is improving the experience our customers are having and addressing any perceptions that are impacting their trust in us. And Councilmember Stewart, I heard your concern loud and clear that we need to improve project outreach as we are delivering on our CIP. In addition to improving our communications around projects, we also want to improve our engagement on the front end to ensure that we truly have an approach to project prioritization that is driven by equity and justice. Additionally, we are assessing the systems and processes as well as the state of our metering infrastructure, supporting our billing and customer service functions to operationalize a plan for any necessary improvements to fully restore the trust of our customers. This takes investment. Implementation of our CIP allows us to ensure that WSSC Water can continue its stellar track record of providing safe drinking water and being a good steward of the environment by getting in front of regulatory challenges and investing ahead of changes in regulation. And where operational reliability and resilience is concerned, the CIP is our biggest lever to ensuring we provide services reliably, and when we have an interruption, that we can recover quickly and continue critical functions to supply water. Now, the last priority is financial stewardship, and there is so much to say about that, and the team will talk about the details of the capital budget that we've established. Our proposed fiscal year 2024 capital budget of $683.1 million represents an increase in $78.3 million or 12.9% from fiscal year 2023's approved capital budget. The 6-year capital improvement program is $4.5 billion, which is an increase of 8.0% from last year's CIP for fiscal year 23 through 28, but is on par with utilities of our size and scope. In building this budget, it's important to know that the current economic climate, supply chain disruptions, and inflationary pressures impacting all Americans are also impacting our budget as well. We are also experiencing lower revenue due to shifting water consumption patterns. Additionally, approximately 80,000 total customer accounts are past due, totaling more than $50 million in arrears, which is impacting our revenue. But at the same time, even though we have those impacts to our revenue, we must continue to invest in the reliability and resilience of our critical infrastructure systems. We also have to continue our role in impacting or protecting public health. These challenges make our proposed 7% rate increase vital to fulfilling our mission to provide safe, clean, and reliable water to our customers. It's important to know, I want you to know, that we are developing strategies to strengthen our financial position, even aside from requested rate increases. We have established an external funding task force, which is led by our new CAO, Christy Bickham. We're exploring opportunities to procure grants and other sources to assist in our efforts to augment our budgetary needs. This group is exploring any and all promising federal and state grant and loan opportunities, including the use of community development block grants, which can be used for funding customer financial assistance programs, as well as funding connection of communities that are not currently connected to our systems, our underserved and unserved communities within the district. We also submitted 10 applications totaling more than $865 million for state revolving loan funding for water and sewer reconstruction, the Piscataway Bioenergy Facility, water storage, underserved communities, and the lead service line inventory and replacement. Our project requests are consistent with new criteria on funding for disadvantaged communities. And on the state level, we appreciate and thank Commissioner Foster for her leadership on ensuring that we could apply, or that there was something to apply for, on the Maryland Water System Assistance Program. That program provides $20 million of coronavirus state fiscal recovery funds to provide relief to Maryland water systems for outstanding water debt from residential customers related to the pandemic. WSSC Water provided our residential arrearages, including all units that are individually metered, of $28.4 million for 49,710 customers who are currently behind on their bills. We are awaiting feedback and guidance and timing from the Department of Budget and Management regarding the status of our application, but we've already pressed forward with communicating with everyone in our delegations to ask for their support and advocacy on our behalf. I want to spend a few moments talking about our bond rating before turning it over to Mr. Levchenko. WSSC Water's team, led by Commission Chair Bayonet, successfully defended our AAA bond rating with all three rating agencies, Moody's, Standard & Poor's, and Fitch Ratings. WSSC Water has achieved AAA ratings for 22 years. However, Fitch retained a negative outlook with the AAA rating, and while each of the rating agencies recognize the pressures placed upon WSSC Water as a result of the pandemic, we also had very detailed discussions about the fact that the levers we pulled to stay within a financial frame, to stay a AAA rated utility, are not sustainable. Things like deferring $100 million in capital. So we've already begun the task of carefully evaluating all options to improve our fiscal position regarding this negative outlook and strengthening our financial metrics to match that of a AAA-rated combined water and wastewater utility. As Chair Bayonet stated, the negative outlook sends a clear message that we need to continue making sound financial decisions to ensure we remain a AAA-rated utility. And we will. So thank you for having us here today. I appreciate this opportunity to share some thoughts with you, and we stand ready to answer any questions that you have. And I believe now I'm supposed to turn it over to Mr. Levchenko. Thank you.
Thank you.
Why don't you introduce the rest of the folks at the table?
I'm so sorry. Yes. To my left, we have Chair Bayonet. We have our Deputy General Manager of Administration, Mr. Joe Beach. To my right, we have our Acting CFO, Letitia Carolina Powell. And to her right, we have Mr. Brian Halloran, who helps with our capital improvement program planning and financing. And who is to the right of you? I don't see. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, with that, I've got some slides that I think will help us run through the packet pretty quickly. I've told WSSC Water folks that if they want to elaborate, that they should feel free to do that as we go through, and certainly, obviously, with council members as well. Please let me know if you want to dig deeper into something. This is not intended to be a primer on the WSSC Water organization at all. We don't have time for that today, but I do have some summary slides that I think are related to the CIP that will help, and then the CIP itself is a little complex, so I think it does merit some background as well.
And I'll just say, we have a new team with WSSC. I have 2 new colleagues on the committee, so I think we'll have a lively discussion.
First, you were already introduced to a couple of our commissioners here today. These are the other 4 commissioners. I did not see Howie in the building, right? So, but we know Howie quite well. The other 3 Prince George's members are up here too. There's been a lot of turnover, not just with the council and with senior leadership at WSC, but also with the commission, especially on the Prince George's side. So At the bi-county meeting, that'll be an opportunity for our council to meet not only the new Prince George's council members, but also the new Prince George's commissioners. And the senior leadership, you've heard a few of them are here today. This is available on the WSSC Water website. Real quick, just a few bulleted items. You heard a little bit of this already, but it is important to have this foundation, I think, when talking about the WSSC Water budget, CIP and operating. As a bi-county agency, they represent about 1.9 million residents in both Montgomery and Prince George's counties, and about 477,000 customer accounts. About 95% of those accounts are residential accounts. They produce about 162 million gallons of drinking water per day, about 6,000 miles of water mains, 5,700 miles of sewer mains. You'll note there's a little bit of a difference there. The water envelope is a little bit larger. It's spread out a little bit further than the sewer envelope. That's an issue when you deal with the water and sewer plan and with category changes, which are actually coming up next week. There are 2 water filtration plants, one in Potomac, the larger of the 2, and then one in Patuxent in Laurel. 6 water resource recovery facilities, what used to be called wastewater treatment plants. And also, very notably, the majority of WSSC's water's sewage is treated at the Blue Plains wastewater treatment plant in the District of Columbia. And I've noted here also the operating budget, the authorized work years of 1,796. You heard a slightly lower number earlier. That's the actual staff that are in place, but the authorized work years is a little bit higher. And this is just a quick map showing the service area for WSSC Water and the 2 plants and the areas they serve. So you can see there's a sizable portion of both counties that is not served in terms of square miles, but much of the population is served. Mostly by the Potomac plant, which serves the largest portion of Montgomery, and then the Patuxent plant, which serves a little bit of Montgomery, but mostly Prince George's. That's just a picture of the Potomac water filtration plant right on the edge of the Potomac River. It may be the only plant that has a national park running through it, the C&O Canal. So if you walk up the C&O Canal, you'll eventually walk by this plant. I mentioned the resource recovery facilities earlier. There are 3 in Prince George's and 3 in Montgomery, but Prince George's has by far a lot more treatment going on in Prince George's. And although about 2/3 of WSSC Water's sewage is treated at Blue Plains, about 80% of Montgomery counties is treated in Blue Plains. So by all accounts, the Blue Plains facility, both on the capital side and when we talk on the operating side as well, is a critical component of the CIP and of the operating budget. And this is our largest wastewater treatment plant or resource recovery facility, the Seneca Water Resource Recovery Facility, which I know Ms. Balcom is very familiar with.
It's my backyard.
But to give a sense of scale, that's about 25 million gallon capacity. This is the Blue Plains facility, and we have a share of that, about 169 million gallon capacity that we purchased. But it's about twice as big as that because it's also serving the district and also Fairfax and a little bit of Loudoun County. So it's about a 350 million gallon per day plant, and it is the largest wastewater treatment plant in the country. Real quick, getting back to the budget, this is a quick timeline of the budget process. The WSSC Water CIP actually is due to both counties by October 1st of each year, so it comes over a little bit earlier than some of the other agency budgets. The schools CIP comes over in December, park and planning around that time as well, so it starts a little bit earlier. But we also have a unique process, the spending control limits process, which is in the fall. So it's very much informed by the CIP, but also WSSC Water has to make financial projections on its operating budget, although it has not gone through its operating budget process yet. It's only just begun, but it has to make some assumptions there for the 2 counties or 2 councils to be able to make some initial decisions about ceilings. But that is a unique process to WSSC Water. And then you can see as we flow along, you have the executive recommendations that come in with the rest of the CIP amendments this year. It is important to note that WSSC Water does a full CIP every year, whereas the rest of the county agencies and county government do a amended CIP in the odd-numbered years like we're in this year. So that's another different process. But we do fold it into the CIP process here. And you can see where we are now. We have the committee review. Another unique process, of course, because it's a bi-county agency, not only do we have our council review, but we have the bi-county meeting at the end of the process. CIP for WSSC Water, as well as the Park and Planning Commission and the Washington Suburban Transit Commission. So those are all settled at that meeting in May. I mentioned the spending control limits process, and you heard the general manager mention the 7% rate increase that they are working towards. That is what the two councils approved as a ceiling last fall, that 7% rate increase. It was a bit lower than what their base models had shown, so they did have to identify a way to get to that 7%, and we'll talk much more about that on the operating side. But just that even at the 7% level, there was a bit of a challenge to get to those numbers. And then there are other limits. There's new debt, debt service, and water and sewer operating expenses, but a lot of that hinges upon the rate increase assumption. And you'd also heard some of the fiscal challenges mentioned earlier, and these very much affect the CIP. First, of course, WSSC Water has a high level of debt service, which is not unusual for an industrial type of entity, but the two councils long ago, as part of the spending affordability process, did set up one of the first metrics related to debt service, which was to try to keep it below 40% of their budget. So that became a guidepost, and the bond rating agencies, especially Fitch, have identified even stricter requirements related to debt that are driving some of their financial decisions now. Also, you have aging infrastructure. Noted here some of the age of WSSC Water's water mains and water meters. So that's been a continuing challenge. Over the past 10 to 15 years, there's been a lot of investment in large and small water main reconstruction work, as well as work at the water filtration plants and the wastewater facilities. But it's still very much a fight to stay on top of the aging infrastructure. So that's an ongoing issue. You heard about the continuing flat water consumption. The challenge there is that their rate revenue is about 85% of their revenue. So to the degree you have flat water consumption, or in fact changes in the categories of who's using the water at what levels, that all affects the revenue coming in. So that's a significant financial issue for them. And then somewhat more unique in the last couple of years, and we've seen this in other departments and agencies, higher than typical inflationary cost increases for a variety of reasons. So typically WSSC Water has had something closer to about a 4% inflationary adjustment for its projects. This time around they have a 6% inflationary adjustment. And this is apart from actual bids they may receive that could be much higher. This is just the standard inflationary adjustment they'll make on projects that are just moving through the CIP. So once again, a significant challenge on the capital side. And then you heard earlier about some of the additional financial metrics that they're working towards. And we'll talk a lot more about that during the operating budget. And then the delinquent accounts you heard as well. We'll also talk about that more later. Some of the CIP numbers. I've got a lot of numbers on this chart. First thing I want to mention is there's a phrase here called information only. And it's a little, it's not the best term. What it is, those are projects that do not meet the state terminology for a capital project for WSSC Water. But in every other respect, they are capital projects. They're debt financed. They have long-term plans associated with them. So we treat them like the CIP. And so for our purposes, we deal with the numbers as CIP plus the information-only projects. And they're a substantial portion of the spending. So we definitely want to include them here. So in the circle and the bottom left of the chart, you can see the approved CIP versus the proposed CIP. The proposed is about $4.5 billion, about $334 million increase, and that is right about at an 8% increase. And there's a lot of puts and takes in there, but this is just bottom line of where the numbers are going. Then on the funding side, it is overwhelmingly WSSC water bonds, although there are some additional funding sources. You heard about some of the federal and state money they're seeking. Hopefully those bars will go up. You also have system development charge revenue, which is intended to pay for growth projects. So that's intended to avoid having to use WSSC bonds for development. And then PAYGO is also a growing number as well. I mentioned earlier about the debt service metrics, and one of the strategies to help, especially on the margins, to try to get within the metrics is to increase PAYGO. And we have the same discussion here at here in the county about PAYGO levels and trying to maintain a certain level of PAYGO to manage or keep our debt within reasonable limits. And then this is just some more detail on the growth funding. I'm not going to get into all of this, but it's about $233 million in the 6-year CIP. The one thing I did want to mention is the 6-year projection for the SDC fund balance is that it is showing a deficit. So there will be discussions about potential increase in the charge that I think the council should have. The charge has not been increased in decades. So it is an issue of, well, when do we do it? When's the right time to do it? Up until now, both councils have not found a right time to increase this charge. And we'll see what our two councils now want to do going forward. But it is an issue looking forward. Not an issue for tomorrow, but an issue in the 6-year period. All right, getting into the CIP itself, there are 3 new projects, but they're all developer funded or developer dependent, both the funding and the schedules. So I've listed these here, but I'm not going to talk much more about them since they don't really affect the areas of the budget that compete. So here they are, and staff's comfortable with them as they are, but they could change as circumstances change on the ground for the developer. And don't try to read this chart. It is in the packet. This lists all the major changes by project. The top has the biggest cost increases, and the bottom has the biggest cost decreases. Just at your leisure, if you have a question about a particular project that we don't go over today, we can get more information on those. Some of the bigger cost decreases are not because the project is costing less, but it's because the projects are moving through the CIP and moving towards completion. In fact, the project at the bottom there is the Piscataway Bioenergy Project. That's the largest single project with a beginning and an end in the WSSC Water CIP. And it's now moving through and it's under construction, so more and more of it is behind us. So that's why that project is showing a 6-year decline, not because it's being reduced in cost. And at the top, you have the large diameter water pipe rehabilitation program with a large increase. And for reasons you would expect that we talked about earlier, inflationary increases, unit costs, and additional work they're doing in that project. So this just sort of lays out where the major changes are in the CIP. I'm going to touch on some of the bigger projects in more detail, but just so you know, this is a place you can go for a very quick summary of any major project in the CIP. So the 4 projects with the largest increase, I mentioned the first one. Also the sewer and water reconstruction program projects. These are very, very large level of effort projects. Dealing with the sewer and water reconstruction programs are dealing with diameter pipe that is smaller than the state CIP limit, so they are information-only projects technically. But as I mentioned, in all other respects, they're part of the CIP. And then the trunk sewer reconstruction program is also here, although much lower increase than some of the others. That actually is where much of the SSO consent decree work has been done over the past decade, where WSSC has spent about $1.5 billion to upgrade a number of its large sewer lines under a court order. So that's winding down, but there's a lot of ongoing work that has to be done there. And then I'd mentioned earlier the importance of the Blue Plains projects. They're actually relatively stable this year in terms of cost, although we do get updates from time to time, and we'll see where the numbers are during the operating budget process, and we'll see if we can make some adjustments. A relatively small increase, but it's a sizable portion of the CIP, about $560 million over the 6 years. And that's WSSC Water's share of the joint use projects at Blue Plains, as well as the conveyance to Blue Plains. Another project I wanted to note is the Potomac Water Filtration Plant consent decree. It's another consent decree we're under to deal with solids handling at the Potomac plant, and I've got the status of that work here. It's well underway. WSSC does expect to meet the deadline for the completion of the long-term improvements. The short-term improvements that were required have already been done, but this is a significant requirement in the CIP that was added about 6 or 7 years ago. And then the large diameter water pipe program I mentioned. There's about 1,000 miles of what we call transmission mains. These are the large diameter mains, up to as much as 96 inches in diameter. And of particular note, 335 miles roughly of pre-stressed concrete cylinder pipe, PCCP. Both counties experienced some significant water main breaks, starting about a decade ago, or about 15 years ago. You might remember the River Road break that made a river out of River Road. That was an example on our end. Prince George's had examples on their end as well, and that was PCCP, which can catastrophically fail. When it does fail, it can fail badly and quickly. So WSSC Water began a major effort of not just rehabilitation, but also acoustic fiber optic monitoring, so that they could identify and catch warning signs of these pipes before they burst. And they've had several dozen incidents where they've identified problems in advance through this program and been able to deal with the issue before a break. So we've had far fewer, in fact, I can't remember the last catastrophic break we've had. WSSC Water can probably remember. I think we may have had one about 5 years ago in a park setting. But it's been a while, so that process seems to be working. And as you can imagine, this project is a high priority of both counties, and for both the rehab work, but also the acoustic fiber optic monitoring, which has an operating component to it as well. And then I mentioned the trunk sewer reconstruction program with the consent decree. That work is winding down. But they still have significant work going on in this project to maintain what's there, and also as they identify new work through this process, new priority one work they call it, that needs to be done. So it's still a major driver of the CIP. And then the Piscataway Bioenergy Project, it's in the middle of construction. It's their long-term solution for their biosolids disposal. It creates a Class A biosolids product, similar to the process that Blue Plains uses. Without that, you create, rather than a Class A product, you're creating a Class B product, which is has to go through much more regulation for land application. So you have the whole biosolids disposal issue associated with this, but also that the plant is doing it through an anaerobic digestion process, so it does generate clean energy. So there is a clean energy benefit to it, and a revenue from that, and also a reduction in chemical uses through this project. So while I wouldn't say this has a short payback by any means, it is one of the few projects that WSSC Water has had that does provide a cost savings and revenue stream over time. Most of their projects do not have that capability, so that is somewhat unique to this project. And also it will be able to handle ultimately the fats, oils, and grease issue, which has been something that they've been trying to deal with for many years as well. This is a new project from last year, the I-495, I-270 traffic relief plan pipeline relocations. The intent is that WSSC ratepayers would not be paying for these improvements, that these would be coming through the concessionaire or some process involved on the financing of the road improvements. But there's a significant amount of work that needs to be done on the WSSC water side, which is still very much in flux as they work with the state. So this is still, I would call it a bit of a placeholder project as we move forward. But the intent is that we will try to keep this off of the WSSC water ratepayers, as well as the other promise that was made by the past state administration was that the road project itself would not require taxpayer funding. So this is consistent in some ways with that promise as well for ratepayers. This is the full list of what I call the information-only projects. We talked about the biggest ones at the top, but here are some of the other ones that fall into that category. Not going to get into too much detail here, but you can see the numbers are pretty big. The water reconstruction program I mentioned earlier, the smaller diameter pipes. WSSC Water had gotten up to quite a high level of water main replacement about 5 or 6 years ago, but for fiscal reasons had to start trimming that back again. So we've gone through a wave of increasing it over time, and then it was decreased again. And the challenge there is then your infrastructure gets a little bit older, you fall a little bit further behind. There is some hope that technology improvements in terms of identifying problematic mains can help you target better, and that you can gain some benefit from that. But if you have thousands of miles of lines, you will need to get up to a certain level of replacement. Right now, they're at 25 miles per year estimated for 23, and the 24 budget would increase that slightly up to 27. But we were at 48 miles, if you look in the slide back at FY18, and a 50 or 60 mile per year would get you about a 100-year replacement. So I think you can get by with this for some time, but I think this is an area where we will probably have to boost this up as the situation changes. So keep an eye on this as we go forward. And then similar with the sewer reconstruction, it's just a matter of math. If you've got that many lines, you're going to have to invest a certain amount. They are once again ramping this program up to about 25 miles of sewer mains and laterals per year, plus having to deal with significant cost increases in the project. And then I noted here the water storage facility rehab program. This is one that also has been subject to cuts for fiscal reasons in recent years, but they are recommending boosting it up again this year to try to restart or return some of the projects within the 6-year schedule and reduce the current backlog of their roughly their inventory of roughly 60. So I know we have Ms. Yahweh. Just to note, the executive's recommendation was transmitted along with the rest of the CIP on January 17th, and the executive did not recommend any changes to the proposed CIP. He noted a few priorities that he wanted to make sure the council was aware of, but no changes to what the WSSC Water had transmitted back in late September. And staff's recommendation as well is to preliminarily support WSSC Water's proposed CIP, with the caveat that we often will have more discussions later that can, in the operating budget, and there may be some linkage to the CIP, especially if there are affordability issues or if there are changes in what we need to allocate to Blue Plains things like that. So there could be some changes here. And then, of course, we have to negotiate with the Prince George's Council in the end as well. Also, I'd mentioned the system development charge. I think we need to have some more discussion about that, about if, when, and how to consider a rate increase there. When would be the appropriate time for that to kick in based on the projections. And then, as I mentioned, it's all subject to final action in May. And then a number of topics that we will want to take up either during the operating budget or after budget. The ongoing affordability issues. That's an annual issue that is not going away. You'd heard earlier about the unserved and underserved neighborhoods issue. These are areas within the planned sewer envelope in both counties that are not currently served by sewer. And one of the primary reasons they're not served by sewer is because of the incredible expense to extend sewer, especially in areas that are already developed. You're generally talking about small pockets, so there's not a lot of shared cost, and you're talking about a very high per linear foot cost. It could be $500 to $1,000 per linear foot. So it's just out of the reach of many to be served. But it is in the interest of both counties to have their areas that are in the planned sewer envelope to ultimately get served. And to get served before they have septic failures, as opposed to having to deal with it on an emergency basis. So that's an issue that there's a bi-county work group that's been meeting regularly on this, and we are still working on trying to get all the elements that would be needed to have a new financing system in place to make this work. But what it would require would be some kind of subsidy coming from both counties and WSSC Water to facilitate these areas getting built out. So more to come on that. Another project that has been in and out of the CIP has to do with advanced metering infrastructure, and part of that would be a meter replacement program or smart meters. The council's had some discussion. Mr. Glass may remember from the past council having some discussion about this. There could be a lot of potential benefits in terms of early leak detection, more accurate billing, things like that. Not to mention the operational benefits to WSSC Water of having a much better sense of what's happening in their system throughout both counties. So it's an area that, unfortunately, it's an expensive proposition to move forward with. So it was a challenge under the fiscal times over the past 5 years to fit this in, but it's an ongoing issue that I know we'll be taking up again. I mentioned the consent decrees. I think it would be helpful to get an update from WSSC Water on those after budget. The SSO one is winding down. The Potomac one is in the middle of its work. I mentioned the system development charge. Regional water resiliency has to do with the DC area as a whole and how to ensure that we have adequate water supply for the region, including the federal government, and so therefore there could be some federal money involved to make this happen. But that's an ongoing regional initiative through the Council of Governments and the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin. I think I got that right, Joe. Interstate River on the Potomac River. Interstate Commission for the Potomac River Basin. I think that's it. So through COG and through them and both, you'll be seeing more about that. And then another emerging contaminant issue, the PFAS issue, which you've seen some news stories about that, both in terms of drinking water and biosolids. So that's an emerging area. Expect more to come on that as there's more study done there and what solutions there are to try to deal with that. So that's it. In terms of my presentation, I know that's a lot to absorb, and we have WSSC Water folks that can answer questions, and I'm happy to go back to particular slides if there's something you have a question about, and let's go from there.
You're very good. Understatement of the day, that's all. Thank you very much, Mr. Levchenko, for the deep dive into all of this. I want to start by providing you with an update on what the council has recently decided. When we have looked at our CIP and the spending affordability guidelines, we as a body decided to front load in the beginning few years. It wasn't a unanimous decision, but it wasn't a contentious one either. Important to frame it that way. And the reason that we decided to do so was understanding the escalating costs, the inflationary pressures, everything we all understand. And if we had these monies set aside, best to use them now and do as much as we can under today's costs. Has there been any consideration for front-loading the CIP in that way, or is there mechanisms to be able to do so?
We could do so, but it would take a while to change the CIP. Basically, what you're seeing in our capital improvements program right now are those projects that have gone through the planning process, are sufficiently designed that we can put a cost out there and be, stand behind it and be confident of it. I would say, if you look at our whole CIP, it really is front-loaded right now based on those projects that are ready to fund, those projects that are ready to build. If we wanted to change that and do even more front-loading, that would probably take at least a couple of years to restructure our CIP. And I wouldn't see any need to do that right now. We're challenged with implementing the CIP as it is now, so I wouldn't want to assign more to our engineering, construction, and production departments without a lot more resources for them to implement.
Yeah, I appreciate the candor, recognizing that your utility is different than our government agencies and departments. So I do appreciate it, and the rationale for why projects are funded now and why they are in the timeline for the next few years. In that same vein, the only other question I have is I think it was last year or 2 years ago, there was a reduction from the CIP, I think 5%, and then some of that is being recouped, or I see Mr. Olchenko nodding. Yeah. Some of that's being recouped and incorporated into this year's CIP. So how much of this CIP is trying to catch up from the previous projects as opposed to, or they're not at odds, but in addition to front load or planning for future projects?
Good afternoon, Brian Halloran, Capital Budget Section Manager. So a lot of the reductions made last year were deferrals. So we pushed a project out a year. Others were essentially permanent cuts. So we lowered the level of a program for a year. So we're not, for example, if our water main reconstruction, we're not adding the miles back in this year. We just did a lower level in this current year than we had previously planned. We are continuing to build back up towards that goal of 50 miles a year. That's in the outer years of the CIP, but essentially it just kind of pushed that sort of stuff out a year. We made some other reductions that in this year, and then from our normal program levels, and then we're going back up to our normal program levels in those other programs. So we're not really catching up in that sense. We're just kind of returning to what our prior plan was.
Now, and again, the differentiation between cuts and deferrals, I think, is important in that respect.
Yeah, one other point, just on the idea of front-loading. We talked about debt service a lot, and they are on the edge of their metrics with regard to their debt service now. So, to add resources, it would almost have to be PAYGO or outside funding, federal or state, to allow them to really front load any more than they already are.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody jump in?
No, thank you. And that was my number one question, was about, we had that long debate in full council about front loading, so that's good. So can you do the system development charge, is that a user fee that we all pay?
Now, the system development charge is paid by new development, and it's based on fixture units, and there's a credit process that developers can go through, that if they build certain infrastructure, they can get a offset on what the system development charge would be for their development. Now, the costs often, as one would expect, in some form get passed on to the buyer or of the residential or commercial buyer. But no, the intent is that though it's supposed to be a closed system where growth pays for growth, but that if the normal ratepayer is not seeing those costs.
It's like an impact fee, somewhat.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great, thanks. And then the flat water consumption, do we know why? Or and is that a good thing?
Well, it's a good thing from a conservation standpoint.
Yeah.
I mean, per capita usage is down, even as you have modest increases in population. They're still at a very flat level. They were at 160 million gallons 20 years ago. So the per capita usage is way down. So that, low flow devices, a lot of it is probably passive water conservation. Just people are using devices that use a lot less water. But if 85% of your revenue is based on people using water, then that's going to be a financial hit. And there's been some discussions about looking at fixed fees again, and WSSC Water can talk about some of the work we're doing there. We did change the fixed fee structure a bit about 6 years ago to try to increase it a little bit, provide a little more stability in their revenue, and it's probably time to look at that again.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that's similar to the gas tax as we use less and less gas. So that, and then just a final one, the underserved neighborhoods. I'm assuming that doesn't include the ag reserve.
Yeah, it's areas that are within the planned envelopes, not areas that are not intended to be served. So yeah, the ag reserve. I can't think of anywhere. Even on the edges, I don't think those areas are planned to be served. You might occasionally have approvals in areas that are not intended to be served, but that's not extending the envelope. That's just providing an exception for a policy that the county may have.
And do we have a timeline for when we would see recommendations from the work groups on that?
I'll let Mr. Beach try that one.
Well, we did provide recommendations. The work group provided a report, and we presented to the committee earlier this year. It came out in September of 2021, and as Mr. Levchenko mentioned, it was to address the issues of affordability, identify ways to subsidize the cost for property owners, because in current state law, the property owner is responsible for 100% of the cost of connection, and in most cases, it's just not affordable. So we are just reconvened last week again, and we're going to focus on make sure there's strong consensus on what is the property owner's responsibility, what will the counties sort of be contributing to that, and what will WSSC be contributing to that, and then what changes in state law are going to be necessary in order to authorize us. Because right now, the way the Public Utilities article is written is the financing scheme is entirely on the property owner, and we do think we need to change that to allow a role for the counties and for WSSC to provide subsidies for that. So the goal I set for the work group was to have recommendations by the end of August. That gives us time to draft the legislative amendments and have them submitted to our delegation by October.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just as Mr. Levchenko mentioned, my house backs up to the Germantown facility, and I've been there for 28 years, and you have been very good neighbors. I particularly like the environmental barrier. That's my backyard, so I appreciate being your neighbor.
Good neighbors. Councilmember Stewart.
Great, thank you. I just have a couple of questions. In the packet that we received, it said the system development charge, that there was a working group. And I'm just curious when the working group took place and if we have like an update on their recommendations.
Yeah, the working group started up a few years ago, and it was looking at changing how the charge worked for developers, and one of the key issues was that For the credits to be available, there has to be revenue generated within the basin where the development is.
Right.
And that can lead to a fairly long period of time before the credits are available. And so there's some discussion about whether you could modify that, make the basins some different, bigger, or bigger than they are now, or more of a county-wide or district-wide approach. But in those circumstances, then there was a significant financial impact that would require increasing the rate in order to ensure that the revenues would still come in time to be able to pay the developers. So I think that's about where it was left, that you had a significant impact on the rates. I know WSSC Water did discuss it with the development community, which was, they liked the idea of more flexibility. They didn't like the idea of higher rates. And that's sort of where it was left. It has not gone any further that I'm aware of, Joe.
That's correct. We're continuing to meet and look at the policy, look at, what the policy is, how we might change it in order to sort of support, smart growth, but also make sure that growth continues to pay for growth. So it is a difficult challenge. I would say that our rates compared to other jurisdictions in this area, especially Northern Virginia jurisdictions, is very low. We haven't changed the rate since 1999, and we compare very favorably to most of the utilities in this region, with the exception, I would say, of Baltimore County Residential, Arlington County, and then Howard County as well. Other than that, we have some of the lowest SDC rates in the region.
And one strategy that has come up, and that I think both counties have probably used it on occasion, is that if there's a economic development component to this, and a county feels strongly about it, the county could assume the SDC credit for the developer, and basically the developer would then receive their revenue stream sooner, which might help the development move forward. The county would then have to wait. They would be the ones waiting for the revenue to come in over time. So that is something that's a strategy available to the counties now through more of an economic development approach, not so much changing the SDC in any way, but it's a way for a county to say this project's important enough to us that we will assume the SDC credit backlog, if you will, for the developer in this particular case. But that's something that would be done on a case-by-case basis, not a blanket change to the SDC.
Right. And I just want to say and I brought this up when Ms. Powell and I spoke on the meter replacement program. That is something I think we all hear from constituents on, and it, I understand how things kind of get bumped from year to year when we're looking on it, but I do think it is a place where we need to be focusing on in the future. And then my last question is regarding projects. I was recently in a meeting with some local developers, and I know like you all are a bit different than building a building. But what they were seeing is, what they said is, when they're going out to bid for projects, it is coming in fairly high, even above inflation, but the projects are actually coming in when they're getting completed, their costs are actually coming in within what inflation is showing now. So they're seeing, like, contractors and other people, their bids are fairly high, but the actual work is coming in closer to inflation. And I just didn't know if you all were seeing something similar.
I'm not aware that the actuals, are coming in lower. We have seen significant increases in our bids that we're receiving, and then particularly with some of our programs like water main replacement, we've had significant increases with the paving costs, because asphalt costs are tied to oil costs, and as we all know, over the last year, oil costs went up very significantly, so that really impacted our paving budgets. And so it can vary depending on the type of work we're doing and things like that as well.
Thank you, Brian. My name is Mike Harmer, Chief Engineer, WSSA. To add on to what Brian said, I'll give you a real working example that I have here. So on the consent decree projects for Potomac, the gravity thickener expansion project, was bid last year, and the project adds 3 new gravity thickeners like to the process. Our original engineer estimate was $34.9 million. And then we did a bid, and the bids came in $10 million higher than the engineer's estimate. And there was a bid irregularity in the process, so we rebid it. And we put based on that bid, we bumped the number up $10 million, and we got a bid right in that range. It was like 44 was the estimate, and 45 was the lowest responsible bid. So yes, we are seeing increases, in all types of projects for various reasons. And also availability of materials is a problem also, and we're dealing with that also.
Thank you. I'm good. Thank you
Great.
very much.
Thank you. Sorry. Yes.
Thank you. I will say, and we can talk about this more when we talk about the operating budget, because we're seeing increased costs overall, especially in chemicals and electricity. But I did want to touch on what you said, Councilmember Stewart, about the metering infrastructure, because it's so critical that we really start investing in improving our metering infrastructure. We have 500,000 meters in the ground, and many are approaching 30 years old. And we talk about AMI as if it's an either-or proposition. Invest in AMI or do nothing. And at the end of the day, we really need to, as Mr. Levchenko said, we have to start investing in improving our metering infrastructure. And it just so happens that meters are becoming more, they have innovated. And most manufacturers are going toward more sophisticated meters, smart meters, that provide all of those benefits. But the basis of the investment is making sure that we can serve our customers well and provide bills that are accurate based on their actual consumption. So that takes us in that direction. And when you talk, President Glass, about front-loading the CIP, that is an area that we would like to go back and move that forward, because we have to invest sooner than later. And I will get with the commissioners and look at how we update our CIP to take advantage of where we are now with the costs, because we do see a continued trend in increasing costs and other things that we will have to do. So we'll go back and make some policy decisions around that to see how we can get that done sooner than later. So thank you.
I appreciate those additional remarks. As Mr. Levchenko noted a few minutes ago, we've been talking about that, and there were some fits and starts. And I had always been supportive of, I remain supportive of. I'm glad to hear that there's more support, and we'll engage in that conversation perhaps when we talk about the operating budget. But with that, there is a recommendation to support this CIP budget. So without objection?
Yep.
Great. And now we're on to item number 2, CIP for storm drains and stormwater management. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I didn't know if you were sticking around for this one too. Okay. Thank you again, commissioners.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Okay.
All right, so with item number one, we're dealing with a full CIP. From this point on, we're dealing with an amended CIP process. So we have, to honor that process, we're going to focus on what amendments came over from the executive. There can be some touching upon other projects, but the goal is to try to honor the biennial nature of the CIP and try to stick to where the major changes are and go from there. So these next few items should not take the level of time that we did with the first item. And the first item before us, this is item number 2, but it's really 2 parts. We have storm drains as 2A, and we have stormwater management as 2B. The storm drain program is managed by the Department of Transportation. So we have Mr. Wallen here to help us with this. And then stormwater management is managed by DEP. So we have the DEP folks in the audience that will join us in a moment. But there's a lot of linkages between these 2 programs, the funding for them, for one, but also the coordination between them. And you'll also be hearing, we have a presentation on flood management issues, and that obviously has a stormwater management and a storm drain component as well. So there is a lot of linkages here. Just real quickly on storm drains, and I've got some real quick slides here. This is the approved storm drain CIP. It's about $36 million, funded mostly with water quality protection bonds, and then water quality protection current revenue and a little bit of federal aid. So the water quality protection charge, which you deal with in the operating budget, is the primary funder of this program, as well as the stormwater management program you'll be hearing about in a little bit as well. And over the past few years, I will mention the council has approved some increases in these projects to try to deal with backlog issues in terms of items that that the county was aware of, that projects that were in planning but could not move forward because of fiscal reasons, and then also trying to deal with a broader inventory of aging infrastructure that's been identified over many years through an infrastructure task force. Once again, just doing the math, how many thousands of miles of storm drain infrastructure do you have, and how much are you getting to? And we're well below a reasonable life cycle refreshment. So there were some increases made in recent years there. These are the projects just summarized. There's a facility planning project that takes in requests from different places. It can be from the private sector. It could also be from public agencies. And non-capital work is prioritized and done very quickly. But the capital work, it depends a bit on what the solution is to that work and whether it can be done by in-house staff or it has to be a broader project. And if it exceeds a certain cost, then it would become its own standalone project going forward. If it's below a certain cost, then it can be done as part of the storm drain general project that we have. We also have an outfall repair project, and that one actually had a significant increase as part of last year's budget, as did the facility planning project to try to get through that backlog I was talking about. And then the culvert replacement, once again, there was the executive last year recommended a significant bump to deal with about, I think it was 4 projects that were in particular need to move forward, and the council supported that. So you have a big bump in 23, but then it returns to its regular level of effort after that. In terms of appropriations, this year is a capital budget year, so the council does appropriate where needed. The executive has identified a couple of areas that need appropriation: facility planning, storm drains, and the storm drain culvert replacement project. The outfall repair project and the storm drain general project don't need appropriations at the moment based on their multi-year appropriation they got last year. In terms of amendments, basically all we have this year are technical amendments in terms of funding for these 3 projects. Over the past several years, the county has worked closer with the state on the long-term financing program that's available through the Bay Restoration Fund and what projects are eligible for that money. And most of the storm drain work we do, because it's so delineated as storm drain work and not as much on the stormwater side, is not eligible for much of this. So we've done a lot of transitioning of moving money from long-term financing to, which has a slightly lower interest rate, to the water quality protection bonds. So they're still debt financed, but they're just, they're under our bond program and not under the state's long-term financing program. And that's cutting across all three of these projects. The executive had sent them over as part of his January 17th package, and council staff concurs with those. There are no other substantive changes to scope, cost, or timing of any of these projects. So staff feels all we have are these technical amendments to discuss today.
Great. We're on. Really, the question I just have is conceptualizing what some of these projects are, right? And essentially how they will relieve water and water during flooding events from the communities in which they're being built, recognizing or predicated upon the recognition that we're getting more flooding events in the DC region. That is one of the outcomes of climate change. We're having a wetter community, and it's manifesting in those flooding events. And so looking forward, how will some of these mitigate those?
I'm going to ask Dan Sheridan, our project manager that handles most of this. I will say this, and before Dan, you know, what we're seeing is with most weather events, they're more intense and more compacted. You know, we're seeing typically the storm drain system is designed, for a 10-year event, and we're seeing more storms that are classified as a 50-year event or a 100-year event more frequently. So our problem is that the system is just being overwhelmed. So I'll let Dan speak more specifically to some of these specific projects and what we're dealing with in that arena.
Hello, I'm Dan Sheridan. I'm with MCDOT, and I run the storm drainage assistance request and outfall repair program. And so, yes, we are seeing more intense storm. The bigger overall question, I think we're working with DEP on the flood mitigation strategy. There are some questions like, do we need to change our standard? Do we need to change the rainfall that we're using to design these things? And we're working on that. In the meantime, these programs are relatively small fixes where there may not be a storm drain at all in some place. And so we are still designing to the standard that everything else has been designed to, and looking at that, our long-term strategy for the bigger picture thing on what are are we changing the rainfall intensity that we use to design things? How will that, how expensive is that going to be, and things like that. But in the meantime, the increase in funding is going to help us attack the backlog that we had of known projects. So I don't know if that was.
No, it's helpful. It's helpful because I know in Annapolis, I think it was last year, Delegate Sarah Love helped change the way the state accounts for flooding events, or the frequency at which I think the rainfall is measured, right, for our own mapping and engineering purposes. So we're making some progress there. Clearly, we need to make more. But I'm personally okay with these changes. I don't know if colleagues have anything else.
Good.
So we're good without objection.
All right.
So thank you.
All right, next up is the Stormwater Management CIP. So we've got a few DEP folks coming to the table. just got a couple of summary slides, and then we'll get into the flood management study, which I think is where much of our interest is. The slides up here, the tables here just show the expenditures and the funding for the stormwater management CIP as approved, and then the funding is approved and as the executive has recommended. So it's a substantial program, 119 million, and it's been higher in past years actually. Once again, supported by the Water Quality Protection Fund in some way or some outside funding. But bonds and current revenue in the Water Quality Protection Fund, and then you can see some of the other sources. The executive has recommended one substantive amendment this year. Let's see, of this appropriations. We don't have to deal with this so much. One significant amendment related to cost increases for a couple of projects within the stormwater facility major structural repair project, $2.8 million based on recent bid experience for the Lake Hollowell dredging project, and then also some significant changes in the scope of the Railroad Branch Dam emergency work. So those combined with the $2.8 million, they're actually coming from different funding sources. One is coming from the long-term financing that I mentioned earlier, whereas that financing was not as available for storm drains. It is available in some cases for stormwater management work. And then the Water Quality Protection Charge current revenue is being used for the Lake Hollowell dredging project. So once again, this is a cost increase issue. It's high enough that it requires an amendment from the council, and staff is supportive of this amendment.
Okay. The questions I had for the previous discussion might be even more applicable here as to how this work helps mitigate some of the stormwater issues that we're seeing, particularly in some of these areas. If you could just briefly explain how each of them are going to help those communities like Lake Hollowell up in the Olney area. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Sayano, Section Chief for the Design and Construction Section. So the Lake Hollowell dredging project is to restore the water quality volume of the heavily silted in Lake Hollowell. And it's also a valve replacement project. The valve is non-functional, but it's very large. So those are the two components of this project. Construction-wise, it's going to be pretty difficult to do this. There's going to be there's a very large drainage area going into this particular facility. So maintaining the water flow and still dredging out the pond is going to be very difficult. But we have a plan in place. And I think most of the overages of the additional expenses, it was due to hauling of the contaminated sediments. And the facilities are rather far, so it increased the project costs. Yeah.
And then the Railroad Branch Dam.
So the Railroad Branch emergency work, it's an emergency condition. There was some slumping of the dam, and it was found that because of the conditions of the embankment itself, and the downstream railroad is a major facility that needed to be protected. We appropriated emergency funds in order to accommodate the repair project. But as they did initial excavation, they found a whole lot of unforeseen subsurface conditions, which increased the cost and the scope of the project. In addition to the sewer manholes, they had to be rehabilitated, and that was an additional expense.
Clearly, the emergency nature. Yeah.
So, Frank Dawson, Watershed Restoration Division Chief, to be direct, these projects are not going to really increase the volume of water that can be stored in a flood event.
No, I appreciate that, Mr. Dawson. The emergency nature, clearly recognizing that as our infrastructure is aging, I'm glad to know, and I've seen the reports and previous work of this council, this committee, of the aging infrastructure, and as long as we're monitoring it and doing what we need to do in these instances to get ahead of any potential problems, that's what our goal is. So thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember.
Thank you. Yes, I support this. I did want to just mention, this is an overall comment for staff in terms of the requests for amendments. I think we talked about this in full session before about a running tally of how these amendments are in relation to the overall budget, just so, because we get them individually in a vacuum, and it'd be nice to see how we're doing overall.
And we did get a report from OMB, which I'll share with all council members. They do keep a running tally for that very reason, especially for FY23, where we have a set aside that is now, 7 or 8 months old with unforeseen projects that may occur. So we do have that tally, and we'll forward that to you.
Thank you.
So this committee will support without objection.
One other project I wanted to mention, the Wheaton Regional Dam Flooding Mitigation Project. It's not recommended for amendment as of January 17th. However, it is linked to the Dennis Avenue Bridge M0194 replacement project, which did come over on the 17th with a construction deferral because of production delays in the project. Not fiscal delays, but the fact that the project just had some circumstances that delayed it. So the completion for the Dennis Avenue Bridge was pushed back a year, and that's going to require, the Wheaton Regional Dam project can't move forward until the bridge project is done. So we'll have to work with the executive to, and this could be something that could come over as part of a March set of amendments that we often see from the executive based on new information. But I think we need an amendment on this project to reflect that unfortunately, this project will also have to be delayed a year.
Okay, so be it. Great. Thank you all for that item.
Right, and with that, I suggest we get right into the flood study presentation. So I'm going to bring that up for Mr. Edwards.
Mr. Edwards, good to see you. How many slides do we have here?
I've got 20 or so, but I don't need to go through all of them. I can go quickly.
We got two other items. And
Yeah,
one of
I
them's
understand that.
A long item.
Yes.
Let me try to figure out how to do this. Here I am. You ready?
Good. Yep. Go. Council members, thank you for the opportunity to talk to you about the comprehensive flood management plan that we are currently working on. I could inundate you with information here, but I won't do that. But this is a really important activity that we're engaged in. You've mentioned it several times, Councilmember Glass. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview. A lot of slides here. I won't go through all of them in detail. Just a few I want to touch on. So why do we need a plan? Background on flooding, what causes it? Why is our flood risk increased, and what is the plan, basically, is what I'll talk about here. So, Keith, you can zoom through this. So, pictures worth 1,000 words. These are some pictures. That's an up-county, small two-lane road in the up-county. We've seen many of these roads like this. So, this is Tuckerman Lane in Potomac. One more slide there. That's downtown Bethesda. I think these are scenes we've seen. And then the next one, I think, is one of the things that really driving us toward doing this. This is the Rock Creek Woods Apartments, where a young man died in 2001. When that property flooded in minutes, it literally went from inches to feet in that apartment complex. So we're trying to understand where in the county that situation might occur again, and probably we're going to find out there's lots of places where it could occur. So this presentation I've given in various ways to lots of different people, and one of the things that I think is important is just when we talk about flooding and the terminology we use in flooding and stormwater management and drainage. And so in this work, one of the things we're trying to do is define what flooding even means for the county. And there's no one definition. It means different things to different people. Different people are affected by different kinds of floods. But understanding what we're trying to address is going to be important as we go forward. The issue of water quality control versus quantity control. We have for years had a stormwater permit that requires us to control for water quality. Now we're talking about water quantity, and the same things that control water quality can help control water quantity, but can't completely control water quantity. So we hear about natural practices, rain gardens and things like that. Those are great for water quality and lots of other reasons, but when we get big storms, they're not the solution. So that's where green infrastructure versus gray infrastructure gets into that discussion. And just, again, these terms about stormwater management versus stormwater drainage versus flood mitigation, all related, but meaning slightly different things. So I won't go on this in detail on this. When we talk to people, it's very important for people to understand background on flooding, why things flood, where the water goes. When it goes down a storm drain, lots of people don't have any idea where that goes. They think it just disappears, but it doesn't. It goes somewhere. So keeping go forward. One important thing here in Montgomery County. So in the coastal community, we all hear about sea level rise. We don't have that issue in Montgomery County. We're not on any tidal waters. Our two main sources of flooding are called fluvial or riverine flooding. That's when creeks, rivers, streams overflow their banks into a floodplain and then beyond the floodplain perhaps. And then what's known as pluvial or urban flooding, and that's when the stormwater infrastructure that's designed to channel water away from where we want it to be gets overwhelmed because the rainfall is too intense, the storm drain's not sized for the rainfall we're having now. And that's what we're starting to see more and more of. And that's where we have less understanding of where we have situations that might create a problem. We understand where our floodplains are, although they're being remapped, but this urban flooding is where we have the real concern that we want to try to understand. When I give this presentation, I go into detail with people about how flooding occurs as we develop, but I won't do this. So Keith, you can skip through these next few slides here. I'm happy to come back and do this in more detail if you'd like. For the interest of time, we'll go through this. So I think it's important just to talk briefly about why flood risk is increasing. So there are three main causes. The first one is changes in urbanization. This is a somewhat outdated map of development in the county. This is from the Maryland Department of Planning. This is a 2010 map. The kind of peach area there is the area considered in the county that's been developed. If we got a 2020 map, it wouldn't look a whole lot different than this, actually, because Montgomery County has been quite developed for some time. But you can see about 2/3 of the county is pretty heavily developed, particularly down around the lower county around the DC area. The next cause of flooding is just aging infrastructure. So these are just some pictures and articles about the sinkhole on 270. But we're seeing aging infrastructure all around the county that needs to be replaced. And it also, the infrastructure, as Mr. Sheridan mentioned from DOT in the previous session, the infrastructure is designed for a certain storm. And at the time we were putting in a lot of this infrastructure, that was the appropriate design. And now, because of actually the next reason that we're having a problem, that infrastructure may be not the right capacity to handle the storm. So Keith, you can go to the next slide. So what we're seeing right now is just many more intense, very localized storms. And this is the picture on the right, the multicolor picture on the right. It's called the multi-radar, multi-sensor map viewer from NOAA. It just shows you the red dots are where the storm is very intense. You can see how localized that is and the conditions it creates. Again, I'll credit my colleague, Mr. Sheridan, who says the problems occur where the rain falls. And that may seem like a simple statement, but that's true. That storm that in Rock Creek Woods that flooded that apartment complex, if it had moved a mile to the east, a mile to the north, we'd be talking about a different neighborhood or apartment complex. And so we don't know where these storms are going to occur. They could happen anywhere in the county, and they have over recent years, and we only expect this to get worse with climate change. So what is the Comprehensive Flood Management Plan? It's really, hopefully we can get all this on the screen here. So a major part of it is really three phases. One, we're doing a detailed study. We're mapping areas of the county that could potentially flood under a range of current and future conditions. And then we're going to, through that mapping, we're going to understand where we have risks for flooding and what's vulnerable in those areas that are going to be flooded. And it's very important to understand that vulnerability, because if if water flows into a floodplain that's designed to flood, that's not a problem. But if it floods into a neighborhood or onto critical infrastructure, that's important. And then we're going to develop alternatives to try to address that, figure out what projects are. And this is going to occur over 3 phases. So Keith, on the next slide here, we're just about to finish phase 1, which is really kind of understanding our current organizational approach to flooding. And we can come back to the T&E committee and should come back and tell you the results of phase 1, which we hope to wrap up this month. But it's looking at our what staff do we have, what budgets do we have, what programs we have to address flooding, but also important things like what are the codes that require the size of storm drain infrastructure, or the amount of stormwater management that's on a property as it's being developed. And then in phase 2, which we're going to kick off here in the next few months, we'll start to do these detailed studies of floodplains to understand what this flooding risk is. And that will probably take 2 or 3 years, perhaps longer, depending on how much of the county we want to analyze. And then the third phase is the implementation of projects, and that could take many, many years as we identify solutions and then implement those. That could take a long time. So on the other part of this, Keith, on the next slide, major part of this effort is, again, to better understand the governance, that is the roles and responsibilities relating to flooding, make sure they're well understood, and so we all know who's doing what, and we're coordinating in what we do. Looking at design standards and building codes to make sure we evaluate those and revise them as appropriate given our current level of flood risk. And then flood information is very important. Make sure our residents and businesses know about how they might be at risk and things they can do to minimize that risk and to take steps to protect themselves. And then budget's going to be a big issue, because obviously we need adequate budget to address this issue. 2 more slides here, and then hopefully we'll have a chance to show you one. This is a slide that shows the CDC Social Vulnerability Index mapped, just to emphasize that we're really focused on making sure we're looking at vulnerable neighborhoods. We want to make sure they are well addressed in this process, because as we're seeing in Rock Creek Woods, for example, it's harder for some communities to recover than others. And we want to make sure we're protecting those that are at least able to protect themselves as a big part of the study. And then last, just a highlight on budget. We don't know the budget of this work going forward, but this slide looks at 2 other jurisdictions in the DC area that are a little bit ahead of us, the city of Alexandria and Arlington County, in the cost of their estimate, their first 10-year capital projects. Program in Alexandria is about $170 million, and Arlington's about $229 million. They're 15 square miles and 26 square miles respectively. The county is much bigger. Now, we won't have to look at the whole county, but in this second phase, we're thinking we're going to study about 200 square miles. So if you just do the ratio, you can see that number is going to get pretty big once we start to implement projects. And I should emphasize the Alexandria and Arlington numbers are just the first phase of projects that we looked at. That's not addressing all their activities. So that's all I had. Keith, I don't know if we have a chance to quickly show that, the Cambridge website. Yeah. I think this really brings it to life. Hopefully we're going to bring up a map that was developed by the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts. They have gone through this exercise that we're getting ready to go through to try to understand the extent of their flooding. And so hopefully Keith can, you can leave those on, Keith. So if you can just unclick the precipitation flooding one there and hide that panel on the left, if that's possible. See the arrow in the middle there? Yeah, just click on that, and then you can sort of center the map, maybe shrink the map a little bit. So this is City of Cambridge. It's 7 square miles, much smaller. And go up to the right there in the icon on the corner, on the black bar, the far right on the black bar. There you go. And click off the precipitation flooding there. So what you see here is just the city of Cambridge, and they have different scenarios they've mapped. And if you open up that window again, Keith, and go down to the current conditions, I should be able to scroll down, probably says 2000 and present day, I'm sorry, present day. So go to, say, a 10% right there. So this is a 10% or 10-year storm you expect to occur every 10 years. And Keith, if you can scroll on the map so you can see the lower right-hand corner of the map, you can see. So under current day, when they get a 10-year storm, that's what they expect to flood. Keith, if you can click on the 1% for the present day, you can see how this grows, how much more they expect. And that's current day conditions. And let's just, for the sake of time, Keith, go up to 2070 and go to 1%. Up a couple more right there. There you go. So in what they're projecting in 2070 with these big storms, much of Cambridge is underwater because of, and this is not sea level rise, which they have a problem with. If you were to click on that, you'd see much more of Cambridge underwater. But this is what we're ultimately, one of the outcomes we have of this is we're going to map the county so that we can see where neighborhoods and infrastructure is vulnerable to flooding. And this will be very helpful for us to understand, where we need to have projects and what we need to do to control flooding. So.
Absolutely. We know it's only going to get worse. It's what all the scientists and local engineers are sharing with us.
Yeah.
What I'd recommend is let's have another conversation outside of the CIP and outside of heavy agenda day to dive deeper into this because this is incredibly important and appreciate this map and such. But let's put a pause on it.
Okay. If I could just say one other thing. I just want to emphasize that this is an effort of not just DEP, but DEP, DOT, permitting services, Montgomery Parks, Montgomery Planning, and Emergency Management and Homeland Security. So
That's my start.
When you do come out and we have time to go back, and you don't have to respond today, but in phase 2, in that 2 to 3 years, would there be things that could be put in place? And so we're not waiting for phase 2 to be complete before we actually start looking at solutions, since this is an issue that's happening now.
correct. Once we start to map areas and start to identify places where there might be solutions, we can jump right into those. We don't have to complete all of phase 2 to do.
Right.
It's going to be done on a watershed by watershed basis.
Great. I just didn't know if anybody was listening to that, and especially people who live in certain areas thinking, oh, I have to wait 2 or 3 years from now before we start getting to solutions.
So in addition to what we're doing in phase 2, we also have 2 or 4 small neighborhood studies that we're going to be initiating with the United States Army Corps of Engineers shortly. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Another? Oh, that's why I wasn't aware. It's like, what am I on your Lex man? Okay, Mr. Lochenko, item number 3.
Yes, this is my last item, but you do have an item after this, so keep that.
I'm aware.
The Recycling and Resource Management CIP, there was an amendment that came over from the executive related to the full upgrade of the existing recycling center complex regarding cost increases for machinery and equipment related to that project. And then also there was a technical adjustment to the transfer station project, but we don't need to get into that. That's more just some numbers. But the full upgrade of the existing recycling center project, Mr. Glass, you'll recall that was a major initiative put forth a couple of years ago. It was identified by the Aiming for Zero Waste Task Force as a critical project to move forward with. You have 2 issues with the current facility. You have a capacity issue, where much of the recycled material has to be diverted to another recycling center in order to be recycled, because we just don't have the capacity. And then you have the facility itself aging and having old, outdated equipment. So the intent of this project was to replace that facility. They did it early on, look at other sites, but did not identify any other sites that could work, that were available. Then they did a study of the existing site and found that they could, in fact, do what they wanted to do on the existing site. And that's the project that was ultimately put into the CIP. Unfortunately, it is a victim of cost increases, and we do have staff here who can speak to the specifics of that. The original cost estimate was about $20.4 million. The amendment is a $7.3 million increase, so it would bump it up to about $27.6 million. This would all be with solid waste disposal fund revenue bonds. So as I mentioned earlier with stormwater management, storm drains, and with WSSC water, it's not a issue of the county's general CIP affordability, or as Ms. Balcom mentioned, tracking where we are on that. It's a separate standalone fund that has to deal with it internally within the fund. So those costs will have to be incorporated into the fiscal plan for the fund, and we'll be looking at the solid waste charges as part of the operating budget going forward. But this is, this would have to be the debt associated with this would be paid for out of that fund. So that's how it would be dealt with. So it's not directly competing for scarce resources within within spending affordability more generally. So with that, I was going to turn it over to DEP to provide their perspective quickly on this so you can understand it. And then apart from this project, we have a short presentation on the Goody landfill remediation, which is moving forward basically very soon, and where we do expect there could be inquiries from the public as it moves forward. So we wanted to make sure the council was familiar with it and well versed on it. It's a project that's been in the works for a number of years, so I think it is important for the committee to get up to date on that. But first, let's hear a little bit more about the recycling center project.
Hello, Willie Weiner. I'm the division chief of the Recycling and Resource Management. Well, this is very simple. When we started this process for upgrading the facility, we had very little information about the building itself. We're going to be using the same building that we've been using so far. We had an idea based on other projects in the U.S. about equipment cost. This is early 2020, the end of 2019. But when we went into the basis of design, basically the engineering taking over this project, they identified a number of things that we had to deal with in the building itself, like power that was not what we needed for the new equipment, and equipment costs, basically. I mean, supply chain issues, equipment manufacturing issues, and things that were identified during the basis of design. So the new estimate that we got just a few months ago increased the cost of what we're looking at for that project to $27 million. Now, we are at 90% of the basis of design right now. We are about to finalize that and put the project out for bid, basically in a few months.
Thank you. Mr. Olchenko, did you want to go through the slides, or did you?
Yeah, I think unless you had any more questions about the material recovery facility, it's a critical project, period. It's sort of where staff is.
No, well, so, I mean, from my perspective, I was pleased to support this, last year, 2 years ago. Going from 80 tons to 200, 240 tons is huge. It's exactly what we need. And if we are going to reduce our greenhouse gases, going to reduce other, I'll use the word hazards with regard to trash remediation, this is what we need to do, right? And so I am supportive, but the one question I do have is, in addition to this, what other steps are we taking within the department or within government as a whole to reduce what comes into the facility, right? That's the end goal there.
Well, we actually doing a lot of other things, but what we actually want is more material into this facility. And less material going to the...
There we go, okay. Because this makes money for us, correct? Because this makes money?
This makes money, and yet what we want is a reduction of waste. And there are certain elements that are going right now into the waste that should actually be going into the recycling. And so that's the path that we're taking. We are trying to reduce the amount of waste being generated and increase the number of recycling being generated in the county.
And so I don't have it right in front of me, but what is, with this amendment, what is the expected completion date? Or when would we see this increase from 80 to more than 200 tons?
Yes, we are looking at mid-2025 for the facility to be up and running.
That's great.
Oh, I'm just excited.
Good word.
All right.
Okay, I think we're good.
Want to move on to the remediation project?
Good afternoon. My name is Jamie Foster. I'm the senior engineer in the Resource and Recycling Management Division, and I'm responsible for the Goody Remediation Project. So I put together a small presentation just to give you some background information regarding this project, because as we mentioned before, we're moving diligently into construction. And so as we're moving into construction, I'm sure that's going to prompt some questions coming from residents that live very close to the construction. So background, the landfill was operated in 1964 to 1982. MDE, the Maryland Department of the Environment, directed DEP to initiate comprehensive site investigations to characterize groundwater quality in 2008. The county and MDE entered into a consent order in May of 2013 requiring the county to remediate this site. Next slide, please. So this slide basically illustrates what the cross-section of the site will look like post-construction. On top, you see the meadow habitat of what the actual recreational entities or amenities will look like. And then below that, we have the vegetative support soil, the geosynthetics, and then also the subsoil cap. And below that, we actually have the trash that's currently there on site. Next slide. So the purpose of this slide is to actually show you where the limit of waste is in relation to how close it is to the Durwood Station community. The blue line represents the property boundary. The limit of the cap is actually the limit of waste. So waste goes up to that property boundary. Right across from that easement, you see the trees there. That's actually Durwood Station community. So the backyards and the kitchen windows of those property owners actually face where we will be excavating and relocating waste. So those residents have major concerns in regards to construction nuisances such as noise, dust, and odor that we're currently trying to mitigate during construction. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the an abbreviated construction schedule as it pertains to the first two phases that are closest to Durwood Station. So we've already initiated construction, and so we plan to be done by the end of this calendar year, moving into probably the first quarter of FY24. But currently now we are working diligently to try to get as much waste excavated and relocated during the winter months. Next slide, please. And so the next few slides just basically outline the mitigation measures that we're planning to implement in order to control dust. So we're going to be spraying the roads, and we're going to do everything that we could possibly do in order to mitigate dust. Next slide. Odor is going to be one of the most difficult nuisances to try to mitigate and control. It's very difficult to control odor because you don't necessarily know the prevailing wind direction, and so trying to understand the wind direction and mitigating the odor is going to be a task for us during construction. Next slide. An odor blanket is what we're planning to do. Keep in mind we're going to be excavating waste, so there are going to be days where we actually have waste exposed, and so we're going to have measures in place to cover that excavated and exposed waste overnight while construction's shut down to make certain that those nuisances do not impact the residents of Durwood Station. Next slide. And noise. Noise is going to be a big issue with the trucks and the heavy machinery that we're going to need to excavate and relocate waste, but we have the white noise alarms on all equipment to kind of help mitigate with noise. And then we do plan to work weekends to kind of expedite construction in the first three phases that are closest to the Durwood Station community. Next slide. So the next few slides actually just show what the site is going to look like post-construction. Post-construction, we're going to turn this into a passive reuse park. And so this is just an overall map of what that will look like. In the lower portion of the site, you see these small panels, and that's approximately 15 to 20 acres that we have dedicated specifically for solar. Next slide. So this slide shows just a visualization of what the actual children's play area will look like on the site once we're done. After we cap the site, we're going to have to get state approval. Once we get the state approval and final acceptance, then we can start to install these passive reuse amenities for county residents. The next slide is going to show another visual slide of what the recreational trails will look like. And then one last slide shows the environmental art that will be installed on site. So whenever you get questions, my contact information is on this slide because I'm sure that you'll be getting.
So, Mr. Foster, in anticipation of the questions, how many homes are on that perimeter?
Approximately 15.
15?
Yes.
So when you talked about the potential negative impacts of the project, we're really referring to these 15 homes?
The whole neighborhood, per se. There's no way to kind of contain odor, per se, and so that's why I say it's going to impact the entire community and just not the ones that's facing the actual construction site.
Sure.
Dust and noise, just those just those homes right next to the landfill, but that entire community will be impacted. And so I've been meeting with them since 2009. I've met with them approximately 60 times over a quarterly basis. They were heavily involved in the design process to kind of keep me accountable in terms of how to design this project in terms of sequencing so that it would not impact them heavily. So that's one of the reasons why we're starting in the winter months.
I applaud the engagement and the deep engagement over the last number of years or decade, right?
Yes.
You said 2009? Yes. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you should teach a class on that because that can always be used here in government and in the county. But last question I have just about the 60 homes, is that one HOA? Is it an HOA? Just so that the lines of communication and what we can expect?
Great question. There are actually 4 HOAs.
Okay.
And there is the Goody Landfill Concerned Citizens Group, and that group is consisted of those 4 HOA presidents along with a couple other board members. And so that group is the group that I've actually met with 60 times during the design process for this project.
Yeah.
Vicki Wan, Acting Deputy Director for DEP. Nice to see you all in person. I just wanted to notify you that we have notified Councilmember Katz. This is his district. We have outreach to his staff as well as 311 to inform them the beginning of this construction. And also we're working very closely with the residents. Now, there is a noise waiver application that has been submitted by the construction firm. We have received comments from these 15 members. In order for us to speed up the construction, we're asking for working through evenings as well as weekends. They have concerns with the extended construction hours. So we're sort of, we want to move faster to get this through as quickly as possible, but we're also challenged with their desire to not have their quiet hours disturbed.
We understand their concerns. Again, the deep engagement which you've engaged in should help. And clearly seeing the outcome with the fields and the parks. And how much solar? Is it? It's great.
Excuse me. Did you get any pushback on the solar at all?
No, none whatsoever. Keep in mind, we have a similar project at the Oaks landfill that's driven by DGS. And so we're essentially going to do the same thing at the Goody landfill once that's capped like the Oaks.
I would just say I'd also reach out to Delegate Lukey's office because I'm not sure, but I think it's
right on the border.
I think it's right on the border. So they may, yeah, and with the lines redrawn and everything, people aren't going to know exactly. So her office may, yeah.
Excellent point. Very good. Appreciate the presentation, the legwork to get us where we are.
So you're supportive of the
Yes.
recycling resource management amendment as submitted by the executive, and we'll go from there.
Very good. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. It is. I was. Okay, so as everyone settles down, we're now going on to, do you want to take a break? Okay, that's okay. No, yes, running from one session and one meeting to another. Let me just say, though, as we start on item number 4, which is the committee work session on the forest conservation law, or bill, I should say. This item was introduced last year and never received a committee hearing. It did receive a public hearing, but it never came before the full T&E committee. And so I committed myself to bring it before the full T&E committee at its earliest opportunity. And not only that, but wanted to make sure that all of my colleagues, particularly the 6 new members of the council, were able to hear from advocates and industry and from the planning experts and others about how this bill will affect things here in Montgomery County. And so I scheduled another public hearing on it. And I think from what I heard, that was very helpful to individuals. And so now we are here. I'm recognizing the time of day and the complexity of this legislation. So what I will just say from the onset is that we'll work through this and see how far we can get. And if it has to come before the committee again, we will schedule it at the earliest opportunity, because I don't want to delay this any further. But we are in a busy time of year. And again, unfortunately, this was never scheduled before this committee last session. I don't know if colleagues have anything else they want to say. I think you're good. You're good. So Ms. Wellens, I will turn it over to you to walk us through the packet.
Great. Thank you so much, Council President. And we're joined by colleagues at the Planning Department, as well as I believe we have representatives from DOT, and Ms. Miller is here from DEP as well. So, and so as you mentioned, Mr. President, there were 2 public hearings, and this bill was requested originally from the planning board itself and introduced under the prior council. The bill would, as you mentioned, it's very complex, so we'll do a number of things, including reducing certain exemptions, increasing forest planning requirements, increasing reforestation ratios, broadening the terms of maintenance and management agreements, making other various updates and clarifications. I'll walk through the staff packet, but stop me if you want me to handle anything differently. So you could see the staff packet, and I'm on page 2 of the memo. There is a mention of the impact statements, which are of course enclosed in the packet. And the first issue that's noted for the committee's consideration is on page 3 of the memorandum and deals with an issue that you actually discussed earlier this afternoon related to the pending state legislation on forest conservation and how that will ultimately interrelate with this bill that's before you today.
I was looking ahead. Yeah.
Yes, you were looking ahead. So you have discussed that already. Just to note, obviously, we don't know if the state bill will be enacted this year and ultimately what it will exactly look like. Of course, it's possible that we would have to come back and re-amend the forest conservation law here in the county, not to say that we shouldn't move forward with it now, but just noting that for everybody's understanding. And of course, you're familiar with the fact that in 2022, there was a extensive report released by the Harry R. Hughes Center for Agroecology at the University of Maryland. detailing trends in forest in the forest, trends in decrease in forest area in Maryland over about 20 years. So that goes into a great amount of detail, and I won't pretend to try to recap it for you, but if you have any questions, I'm sure the folks here can answer it, and also it's available online for everyone to review. The first amendment, or really there are two amendments that are kind of work in tandem that are included in the packet for your consideration. They're at pages 4 and 5 of the the memo, items number 3 and number 4. So this relates to the priority areas under the forest conservation law where, in general, trees, shrubs, forests, etc., cannot be disturbed unless a variance unless someone qualifies for a variance and obtains that from planning. So this First Amendment would, item number 3, would expand those priority areas to include forests in a floodplain or stream buffer, except if the activity occurring within the floodplain or stream buffer is permitted under the environmental guidelines. This was an amendment requested by the Forest Conservation Coalition, made up of many community activists for environmental issues. And thank you to the Planning Department staff who helped actually write the amendment so that it would work. So that's for your consideration, and it kind of goes in hand in glove with the number 4, which relates to, okay, if you adopt this amendment under number 3, then if a variance is granted for one of those priority areas, then what is the required reforestation ratio is going to be? And so that's what that next amendment addresses.
Sure. So thank you for bringing us up to speed on that. And one other comment I'll make at this point is the very first time I was in the new Park and Planning headquarters in Wheaton was just to catch up, to see the building itself, and to talk about this legislation. And that was in the pre-COVID times when it was being worked through. And I'm glad we're here now, and again to have planning staff with us. So the decision point number 3 and the recommended amendment by the Forest Conservation Coalition. Can you share with us your perspective? And what I think is important also is at this point how we got here from your perspective. Fill us in on those years of conversation since I was last in the planning department to talk about this.
If it's okay, I'll start with your last question first.
There we go. Sure.
I think one of the first slides, Christine, outlines the history. So if you can start flipping through, probably this one here.
Perfect.
So it's been about a year and a half since we've been working with the stakeholders and relevant agencies and groups that are interested in this legislation and an amendment to the Forest Conservation Act in Montgomery County. We started in November of 2021 with several stakeholder working groups. We had 4 at that time between November and December, where we started outlining the goals of the initiative, looked at data, looked at what other counties that are comparable to Montgomery County have done in terms of their no net loss of forest amendments to their local laws, and ultimately came up with a draft of these amendments. After that, they were reviewed by planning's forest conservation experts, the reviewers that review forest conservation plans for compliance with this law, and also importantly by the Maryland Department of Natural Resources for compliance with the state law. Every change that we make to our local forest conservation law must be reviewed by the state for compliance with the enabling state law. So we made sure that everything that we were proposing was acceptable, and we did hear back that it was. In May of 2022, we had the planning board held the public hearing, and these proposed amendments, as you noted, were transmitted to the county council. And then, as you also noted, 2 public hearings have been held since that date. So I can get into your first question about these potential additional amendments that have been requested by the
I mean, if
Forest
you have a more
Coalition, if
formal
you'd like.
presentation, you want to run through your slides, you can go.
These are here for reference if we need them, but I can go through, there are quite a lot of them, so I don't, maybe as we
We'll
need
keep
them, I
them
can pull
relevant
them
to the
up.
discussion.
Yes, that sounds good. But the first and second change, I suppose numbers 3 and 4, are related to a request from the Montgomery County Forest Coalition to protect more existing forests in the county. This is in addition to what's included in the bill, which we did work with the coalition to include many of those changes, and so much of what's reflected in the bill came from requests from that group. But there was this one outstanding request to protect additional existing forests. And so after quite a lot of back and forth and additional meetings with that group, we determined that by adding this particular type of forest in a floodplain and stream buffer, into the requirements for a variance, it would add a little bit more forest or protection for existing forests in the county, while not being too all-encompassing of forests, because that would exclude forests from the remainder of the law, which is why we have the other requirements in the forest conservation law to begin with. So that's the origin of this change. We've worked with the commission's legal staff to make sure that it's acceptable and that it would work in practice. And then number 4 is, as Christine mentioned, it gets at, if we do have one of these cases where forest might be impacted in a floodplain or stream buffer and a variance is required, in those cases, there was a request to have more mitigation to account for that happening. And so the Forest Coalition requested a 2-to-1 reforestation ratio in those cases in order to align this amendment with the proposed amendments to the reforestation ratios elsewhere in the law. We actually wanted to reflect that new structure that's being proposed, so that's why you see 2-to-1 and 2.5-to-1. And the difference is where exactly that mitigation is taking place, whether it's near the project or within a priority area or outside one of those areas. And in that case, it would be a higher mitigation. And that was also a request from this coalition that we incorporated early on.
Councilmember Balcom.
Thank you. So thank you. Is this, I don't know how much land this is. Is this a big amount of potential land, or is this a smaller adjustment?
You can go ahead.
What I would say is Christina Sorrento, I'm the chief of the Intake and Regulatory Coordination Division for the Montgomery County Planning Department. And what I would say is stream valley buffers and floodplains, those are, well, I can't tell you how much land area they cover. However, I could say that that is an area that we already look to try and conserve. So this adds another layer to that. So although I think it's an important addition, I don't think it's going to, it's not a huge change from what is already occurring.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. I think along those lines, it might be helpful. I know you all have lived this, and I appreciate all the work you've done. But just to kind of put this in context of the whole bill and what this actually does cover in terms of what we're looking at in the county, and even how we define a forest and what that area is, I think is important for people to understand what the overall. Well, I'm very, very supportive of this, and I hope we move it forward. There's a lot we need to do on forest and tree canopy protection, and this is one piece of it. So I think giving that context might be helpful.
So I have the existing law here, and what I'm going to do is pull up the applicability section because I think that's helpful, and we'll get at your question. Unfortunately, I don't think we have a slide that covers that, but really I'll speak a little bit more broadly first to try to address that. And I think perhaps what you're getting at too is that the forest conservation law in the county does not necessarily cover all types of forest loss that we might experience. Certain types of development and certain types of plans and sediment control permits trigger the forest conservation law. And in some cases there may not be impact to forest, and yet the forest conservation law is still triggered. And in those cases, we have afforestation requirements to help grow the county's forest. So there's a number of different triggers, mainly different types of development, but not all development. And there are certainly other more natural causes to forest loss that may not be addressed from the forest conservation law. I'm happy to go through, but does that help?
Yeah, I think that for me, what helped to get my head around it is to know that this applies to properties over 40,000 square feet, and that when we're talking about a forest, we're talking about covering a land area which is 10,000 square feet. So in terms of projects moving forward in the county where development is occurring, this is a very small percentage of that, correct?
I don't know the exact percentage, but I think your point still stands, yes. And there are certain cases where the 40,000 square foot threshold might trigger the law, but then that project might qualify for what's known as a forest conservation plan exemption.
Right.
And in those cases, sometimes the criteria for whether forest is impacted or not is 20,000 square feet of forest. So anything less than 40,000 square feet in terms of land area and 20,000 square feet in terms of forest is not necessarily included in the law. It's a good point, yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to set that context.
Well, no, so I think what you're doing is hitting on a really important point, right? Because let's continue broadening it out, right? On one level, Councilmember Balcom asked, what does this actually mean, right? And Councilmember Stewart is taking us back out, looking at the whole landscape. How much land is there to be developed, right? That's really, I think, the heart of the question. If we're talking about 40,000 square feet and then 10,000 square feet, how many properties of this size really do exist? Big question to put you on the spot, I understand. But again, it's the context, and for people who have not, read the hundreds of pages. Thank you, Ms. Wellens. But it's an accurate recording, right, of public sentiment and of the law and other resolutions. But what are we talking about here?
I'll try.
Yeah.
Because and Robert Cronenberg for the record, but that's a question. I don't think we can give you an exact acreage, because when you look at properties that could consolidate to get to that 40,000 square feet, or you get to properties that are already at the 40,000, which is, that equates to an acre of property. So an acre of property or more throughout the county. We do have some large sites, but there are other restrictions on them that wouldn't let them develop to the full potential I think that they'd want because of environmental restrictions or other maybe master plan or other land use restrictions. So it's a hard question to put an exact number on, but and I don't know that I could even give you a percentage of what.
Well, and I think the response that you just provided, expressing the complexities, what that also does is share that this is not the silver bullet, right? That there are other measures already in place to account for other pieces of property that we want to protect, that we want to nurture because of the nature, right, of them. What this means to me, quite frankly, when I look at this legislation, which I support, there's no secret there, it's that in order to protect and to support tree growth and the programs that do that, we have to strike a deal with our community and with our developers and encourage the growth in areas that won't be affected, or that where trees won't be affected, where forests won't be affected. And to me, that's infill, that's transit-oriented development. There are other types of properties that I think fit that bill. And if this is the goal that we all want to achieve, we have to make those smart and tough decisions sometimes.
Sure, if I can just add, Tanya Stern, Acting Planning Director with the Planning Department. I appreciate the conversation about zooming out and how this sort of fits into that. But just as what Robert was talking about, what you were sharing, reminds me of when we were talking about Thrive Montgomery 2050, and one of the reasons why it promotes directing future growth towards corridors, towards areas that already have either infrastructure or other pieces that may not be as impacted, but that may not impact forests as much. It's partly because we have we don't have as many areas, we don't have very much sort of greenfield, areas still available to develop in this county. And so that's why you're seeing, and we'll be seeing more infill development. There will be different types of sites and, some of those that may be impacted by this law. At the same time, if I could take the opportunity to tie this to the Climate Action Plan, which very much talks about the tree canopy and expanding the tree canopy. So these types of efforts, even though it doesn't apply everywhere, it still helps to support that larger goal as well.
Right. It is diving in, pulling out, figuring out how they're all interrelated, and I think this is a very healthy conversation because they are all interrelated. And I was just reviewing the county executive's testimony for this and said, while he supports this, there's more to do, right? And as we figure out what that more to do is, going back to Thrive, going back to our climate mitigation plans, there's a lot within all of that to preserve our land use, to build infrastructure that is smart and environmentally sustainable.
Thank you. I support this too. However, I think that it's complicated. The question isn't, do you want more trees, yes or no, everybody vote. It's complicated. So I think we need to have a conversation about some of the things that are a little bit sticky. And I fully agree with the goal of net zero, and I think that we need to start talking about how we add to the canopy. So I think that that's important. That question is more involved in that who pays for it. So I think that's important. I think one of the issues that we already started talking about today, and I want to thank you all for spending time with me and my staff last week to kind of delve into it. That was very helpful for us. So the state bill. So this has been going, the conversation has been going on for a while now, and I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. And I know that the advocates are very, they've been at it for a long time. You've been at it for a long time. I haven't. And so we need to catch up a little bit. So why can't we wait until the state determines what they're going to do? It's a 6 weeks time?
So while you could wait, I would actually advise not to, because one of the parts that the state bill, and we don't know what that will eventually look like, but the one part that no one seems to have any controversy around is it allows for an alternative approach. So the state bill itself actually requires a higher mitigation ratio than our bill does. Because when we were drafting this bill, we met with the development community, we met with the environmental community. We understood that the goal is no net loss, and we knew that we actually could get there with just some minor tweaks rather than going. So we changed, for instance, with the reforestation ratios, which there's a whole rubric with them, but we changed it from a 1/4 acre to 1 to a 1/2 acre to 1. The state bill says straight out 1 to 1. That is going to be a massive change. And if that gets implemented and we don't have this already on the books, we will have to do 1 to 1, which will certainly drive up the cost for anybody that comes through with development at that time.
So I guess I don't understand the last thing that you said. So if we have a bill in place that supersedes?
So the state bill, as it's drafted now, allows for an alternative approach by a county if they have legislation in place that would also achieve no net loss. And so by having this legislation in place, that would essentially allow the development to continue to happen without having the large impact that having a 1-to-1 and 2-to-1 requirement for reforestation would have if we were subject to only what the state bill is going to potentially pass.
Okay, that's very important. Thank you.
And then we couldn't do it retroactively, obviously.
Yes, you couldn't do it retroactively, so you'd have a time period there. Yes.
Very important. Thank you. I didn't gather that. Okay, so thank you. So that answers that question. And then we had lengthy conversation about the mitigation bank credit. How do we resolve that?
So, unfortunately, I think it's also tied up in this state bill, and there needs to be a change to the state law in order for us to allow applications for our existing forest retention banks to continue. At the moment, we are allowed to accept applications for planted forest banks, and I think we've done what we can to encourage those types of banks, but they're more expensive and more difficult to establish up front. So there just are fewer of them, unfortunately. But if either this Senate bill with some changes, with some tweaks, or one in the near future can bring existing forests back into the picture, I think then that complements what we're proposing with the county's no net loss of forest bill, in that it helps applicants achieve these new reforestation ratios that we've laid out. And it will allow for banking to kind of continue and become more spread out throughout the county. And as you saw with the reforestation ratios, we've created this tiered approach where it's incentivized to provide mitigation close to the development site or in a priority area, and without the ability to protect existing forests in banks throughout the county, and without incentivizing that in some way through legislation, it's going to be more difficult, I think, for applicants to achieve that.
I would like to add one more thing about existing forest banks, because I think this is crucial, and it was a point that we were not aware of when we were just talking to you a moment ago. I did not understand that the county executive has actually opposed changing the time period. Right now, the state law, as it's proposed, gives an end date for when you can use existing forest mitigation banks. I believe the end date's like 2026 or something like that. That to us is problematic, because we think that existing forest mitigation banks needs to be one of the many tools to get to no net loss. If we, it's great to have planted forests, and I understand why everybody wants planted forests, but at the same time, if you have a great existing forest, why not conserve that too? And if you have an end date, it's harder to convince property owners, oh, put this in a forest mitigation bank, that will be a good use of your property, because they don't know whether they'll actually be able to sell the credits in time. And so I think that really makes that tool difficult to use. And so that is one of the amendments we are pushing very strongly for in the state bill. And that was one thing that I just wasn't clear on when we were discussing the state bill earlier.
Yeah, thank you. I was confused about that too. I think that, so we talked also about this planning staff's role in helping to do this matchmaking. I think that's a really critical component, because you would have more knowledge about sites that are available throughout the county. I think that that's a way to help. If we can't increase the mitigation bank credits, is there a way to move to payment in lieu without an additional fee? Of course, there's a fee. It's payment in lieu, right? But the way that it's set up, first don't cut down the trees, then plant the trees in the same property. Then, if you can't do that, plant them in the stream bed. Then mitigation credits, then payment in lieu. Can we, if there's no mitigation credits, can we somehow not penalize the property owner if that remedies not available?
So we're certainly not trying to penalize anybody. The fee in lieu system is set up based on an old council resolution that it's a set amount, and it changes every 2 years based upon the consumer price index. So it's a pretty set fee. We don't really have an ability to change it unless the council wanted to look at that again. But the idea that you were talking about earlier with planning staff acting kind of as a liaison, facilitator, matchmaker between property owners that have existing forest and a developer, that is certainly something that we are very interested in exploring. That is one of the reasons why we are requesting an additional, work person basically for the team that works on this, so that we can start doing that program. Because I think that will help, especially if we are not able to get a change at the state level on the mitigation banking issue. That will help, and that should alleviate costs as well.
If I could add to that, I think based on the good work that Kristen and Christina have done, I think they've already started kind of pushing that idea forward with the Reforest Montgomery program, where they've been working with different groups, especially in the Ag Reserve, where we've seen an area where we can see planting a little bit easier because you might have a little bit more open fields, and we're working with different associations to make that happen. So I think they've started that program already, but not in the sense of, it's not formalized for forest conservation the way that you're talking about it. But I think in terms of using funds to matchmake and find properties, it's something that we definitely are equipped to do. And I think we have the resources, from a GIS standpoint, to locate and to map and to track and things. But to Christina's point, I think that's something that having the additional staff and kind of promoting that even more so, it definitely requires more work. But that's a challenge I think that we would be definitely willing to do.
One last question, if you don't mind. So when would this go into effect, and what about the properties that are currently in the middle of making this happen?
Excuse me, I'm sorry, it's not an expedited bill, so it would take effect on the 91st day after it's signed by the county executive. We don't have sorry, just double checking to see if
I know, it's
anything additional.
279 pages.
Exactly. So
Okay, no, that's fine, thank you.
91st
And
day
then,
after it's signed.
and then, so if a property is, at what point do they lock in what their remediation plan is?
I thought Christy wanted to add something. So traditionally with the forest conservation law, we don't allow for grandfathering, and what that means is that when a project, the date of their application is sort of the point in which we would determine, okay, if there's a amended law that has been enacted before that date, they'd be subject to the amendments in the law.
I was just going to say, when they get planning board approval is actually when they know that they're good to go.
Regardless of how long it takes to move the project forward?
Without any kind of legacy provision or anything in there, it's, I mean, a lot of times once it's to a certain point, then yes, but.
And each plan has a validity period to it, so that would govern with any kind of subdivision, whether it's 5 years or longer, but that would dictate kind of how long they have to kind of move ahead.
Okay.
Good conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So, Ms. Wellens, a few decision points. So if we want to go through them, and then the committee can make its decisions.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we were looking at items 3 and 4. You could consider them in tandem or separately, but since they were related, again, the adding the stream buffers to the priority areas and then setting forth that if a variance was granted for a stream buffer, what, addressing what the reforestation ratios would be required. So you can consider that today if you'd like.
I agree.
Support?
Yeah, support.
Great. Support 3 and 4?
Yep, 3 and 4.
Okay.
Thank you. Item number 5 relates to what Kristen was just expanding on in response to Councilmember Balcom's question on the forest mitigation bank. So this one, Kristen, correct me if I'm wrong. So the current state law, due to relatively recent amendments to state law, is that you may not use existing forest credits as part of your mitigation system. And the potential amendment here in number 5 is if the state, during its current deliberations, were to switch back and say, no, you can use these existing forests for credits, then in that case, would the council want that to be an option? So that would essentially, under the bill as we've drafted, we were taking out the forest credits for existing forests because to be consistent with state law. So this is really going back to Councilmember Balcom's point about what is the state law going to be?
I'll just quickly add, we were originally directed by Maryland Department of Natural Resources to make this change to the county law to make it consistent with the change to the state law. And then now there's this Senate bill. So we wanted to take that into account so that there's flexibility if this bill were to pass, so that we don't have to come back and have another amendment at the county level. If that's the case, applicants would be able to move forward with those banks right away.
You comfortable?
Yep, makes sense. Thank you.
It's unanimous.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Chair, the last issue that was identified by staff for your consideration, it's number 6, and really on described more at page 7. These are just technical amendments that staff identified, in between the time that we had it ready for introduction and today, since it's such a long bill. These are purely non-substantive changes for your consideration and approval.
That's without objection, yeah. And that's it. So let's just make it formal. All those in favor of the bill as amended? Aye. Very good.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but just wanted to make sure we didn't forget the regulations too, because I
There you go. Yeah.
earlier, but they're the companion
Yes.
regulations. And in this case, since you've adopted some amendments, I think that might necessitate some changes to the regulations. I'm not actually positive.
We can take a look at that.
Okay.
I'm not positive off.
Okay.
It's possible we don't need to do any, but
Okay, so we could bring that to the full council, though, if there are needed
Yep.
parallel
So
amendments.
taking another look at the regulations, if they need to be amended to conform with the bill the legislation that we just approved, that we can do that at full council. I'll just close by expressing my appreciation to all of you for the years that has taken us to get here, and all the advocates for making sure that we get this done, and to the development community for recognizing this is important. Trees are important for the residents of today and the residents of tomorrow, for whom they're building homes and building businesses. And I think we've gotten this to a good place, particularly with the state trying to do something as well. Clearly, Montgomery County wants to see what they're doing, but we don't want to be preempted. We don't want to be superseded, which is why the timeliness of this is so important, as Councilmember Balcom asked about. So, any closing comments? Yeah.
I just want to say thank you. I mean, I know that I barraged you with a lot of questions, and I just really appreciate your patience, so thank you.
Best committee.
Great question.
Hey.
I just want to say thank you so much. I'm super excited about this, so thank you.
Very good. We're adjourned. Thank you.